Hello, good day, and welcome to the 41st Gabriel A. Bernardo Memorial Lecture. We welcome our viewers, students and teachers of library and information science, information professionals, and all our friends here in the Philippines, Australia, and around the globe. I'm Paul Jason Perez, a faculty member of UP SLIS, your host and moderator for this lecture. Before we proceed, please take note that our webinar is in high definition or HD. For an optimal viewing experience, please check and adjust the settings of this live stream to HD. You may also take the opportunity to check the audio and adjust the volume to a comfortable listening level. This lecture is live on both our YouTube channel and on our Facebook page, UP SLIS. So in the event that you encounter any issues on watching us live on Facebook, you may also watch us this webinar at YouTube via the UP SLIS channel. After postponing the GAB lecture last year, we're very happy that today we can deliver the lecture to a much wider audience. But before our talk, allow me to explain the mechanics of this webinar. If you have any questions during the lecture, you may post your question by going to www.menti.com and typing in the code 4013660. All questions will be tackled in a question and answer portion after our speaker and our reactor have presented. Please take note that we will not be entertaining questions posted in the comment section of this video. Again, you may post your question by going to menti.com and typing in the code 4013660. The website and code is shown on screen throughout the lecture. Alternatively, you can use the QR code shown on screen to go to the questions page. At menti.com, you may view the questions posted by our other viewers. So if a question you wish to ask has already been posted, please vote the question by clicking its thumbs up icon so we can prioritize and address it first. We will be issuing certificates of participation to those who are joining us today. We ask that you finish the webinar and watch out for the announcement containing the link where you can get your certificate. As part of the requirements for the certificate, you need to answer a question correctly. We advise that you listen intently to the speaker during the talk. If you answer incorrectly, you can rewatch the video and try again. For registered professionals, this webinar may be applied for continuing professional development or CPD as a self-directed learning activity. Again, please stay with us until the end of the webinar for instructions on how to get your certificate. If in case you miss portions of this public lecture, you may view this as a Facebook video or check our YouTube channel at UP SLIS. And now, to formally welcome us all, let us hear it from the Dean of the School of Library and Information Studies, Professor Mary Grace Golfo Barcelona.
Thank you very much, Paul. Good afternoon, everyone. I am very pleased to welcome you all to the 41st Gabriel A. Bernardo Lecture Series. As Paul mentioned earlier, had the planned GAB lecture series last year pushed through as scheduled, it would have been the 42nd of the series today. But due to the lockdown 3 days before the scheduled event last year, we had to cancel. The UP School of Library and Information Studies hosts the annual Gabriel A. Bernardo, or GAB, Memorial Lecture Series in celebration of the legacy of Dr. Gabriel A. Bernardo, the doyen of Philippine librarianship. The GAB Memorial Lecture Series is the longest running lecture series related to LIS and has been the venue for the discussion of relevant library and information science issues and trends. To be able to welcome you today to this event brings so much warmth, and grateful feelings to my heart because it means we are alive and healthy amidst the current situation we are in. Likewise, it means we also are persisting and finding ways to carry on, especially with one of our most treasured traditions. I am sure that Prof. Bernardo up there is very happy, more so because of our theme for today: Information Societies, Responsible Citizenry, the role of libraries in a democratic society. In a write up by the International Federation of Library Associations and Institutions, or IFLA, entitled Libraries, Access to Information and Democracy, the role of libraries in building and strengthening democracy around the world was emphasized. It started with this line, which I quote: if information is power, democracy, the rule of the people, requires access to information for all. By providing this access, libraries have an indispensable role in promoting democracy. This relationship between democracy and libraries is integrated in the professional values of librarianship and is an important tenet in many national and international policy documents. Libraries provide services, activities, and media of various kinds, which together contribute to equip citizens with resources that enable them to engage in society in an informed manner, thereby contributing to democracy. While writing my welcome remarks, I could not help but ask myself, what would Professor Gabriel Bernardo say if he were still here with us? In an article published in Manila Times on November 27th of 1962, Professor Bernardo was described as highly respected for his highly principled and idealistic standards imposed on those under his influence. He has, for instance, many a time refused to recommend someone for a position whenever he felt that the candidate was unqualified. On the other hand, he had been known to work very hard to help someone obtain an opportunity whenever he was confident of the person's qualifications. I believe that such an idealistic and principled attitude also meant fairness and equality, virtues that democracy espouses. Moreover, during his time in the university, he was referred to as the university librarian and admired as an understanding and helpful friend of every student in quest of knowledge from the books and manuscripts in his care. After the Second World War, he painstakingly took the burden of rebuilding the university library collection. Thus, when he was appointed as technical advisor to the Philippine Foundation of America, he was able to gather donations of books and library resources from different universities in the US. But rebuilding the university collection was not enough. As Natividad Versosa described in her article, Professor Bernardo realized that the greatest drawback was the lack of means to make the collection fully available to both students and faculty members, wherein availability in library terminology means accessibility of its materials through its catalog, its serial indexes, and its bibliographies. These ignited his passion to come up with a union catalog and updated bibliographies of Philippine publications. Going back to my earlier question, if he were here with us, I could be sure he would feel very excited to join us in this discussion of the indispensable role of libraries in the promotion of democracy. Because foremost to Professor Bernardo's greatest achievements was having made the library resources and the information in this collection available and accessible to all students and faculty of the university and to anyone who had passion for accurate and timely information. Lastly, I'm sure he would be very happy to join the discussion today with our esteemed speaker, who herself has been a zealous advocate of information and digital literacy. Her long-standing interest in political science and democratic processes led to her current research and publishing that have focused broadly on the information and digital literacy requirements for accessing government information and datasets. I thank our speaker, Dr. Maureen Henninger, immensely for agreeing to speak before us today. I will no longer keep you waiting. Thank you for joining us today and welcome to the 41st Gabriel A. Bernardo Lecture Series.
Thank you very much, Dean Golfo Barcelona. I'm sure Dr. Gabriel Bernardo will be very excited with our topic for today. Moving on, it is with great pride and honor for me to introduce our Gabriel A. Bernardo Memorial Lecturer. This year's lecture is to be delivered by Dr. Maureen Henninger. Dr. Henninger is in the forefront of research and practice in digital environment, and with the advent of the internet, published and consulted widely on digital literacy for industry, government, and non-government organizations, both in Australia and around the world. She has been an invited guest speaker at many conferences within the information, medical, biotechnology, and education professions. As an information professional, she has worked with government and international organizations to deliver digital literacy and projects for the preservation of information artifacts in many Asian and Pacific countries. In her academic career, her research, curriculum, and teaching has been in the field of digital literacy and more recently, data literacy, particularly in the journalistic field. Her current concern is with governmental mechanisms and practices that enable and constrain democratic processes and active citizenship. Dr. Henninger finished a bachelor's degree from the University of Sydney, a graduate diploma in information management, and a master's degree in information science from the University of New South Wales, and a Doctor of Philosophy degree from the University of Technology, Sydney, where she is currently a visiting fellow at the School of Communication, specializing in digital information management. Personally, I know her as a former professor who exhibited passion and excellence in her field and compassion and generosity to her students. This afternoon, we're very lucky to have one of the best persons to talk about libraries, information literacy, and democracy. Ladies and gentlemen, let us all welcome Dr. Maureen Henninger. Hi, Maureen.
Hello, Paul. How are you?
I'm good. It's very nice to have you with us.
I am delighted to be here, and I'm actually rather overwhelmed with that wonderful introduction by you and by the Dean. Fantastic. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Maureen. Now, on with Dr. Henninger's lecture.
Magandang hapon sa lahat. Good afternoon, everybody. I am honoured to be asked to present this webinar on the occasion of the 41st Gabriel A. Bernardo Memorial Lecture Series. It is a series that celebrates and acknowledges the enormous contribution that Bernardo made to the Philippine information professions. I would also like to thank Dean Mary Grace Golfo Barcelona and her academic community for extending this invitation to me. I am particularly pleased to be asked to share my thoughts on the concept of information literacy, a broad concept that surely is embedded in Bernardo's philosophy when he articulated his concern for the proper utilization of materials and human resources. Over the years, my research interests have been primarily focused on various aspects of information literacy, particularly in the information environment. And in recent years, I have concentrated on those areas which impact on civil engagement, a merger, if you will, of the political and information sciences and the accessibility of government information regimes of truth. So let us begin. And I will do so by sharing with you some of the aspects that I am passionate about. Actually, there are many things that I'd like to share with you, but as I only have 40 minutes or so to talk to you about these things, I will have to leave it to just a few things. As I have already said, my passion for all aspects of information literacy is really what has driven me over the years. However, I would like to take a few moments to examine the different types of literacies. But in particular, I want to talk to you about those literacies which are civic and digital. And in fact, in this world that we live in is a digital world, so I will be predominantly speaking about digital literacy. I would also like to, of course, move into how we can participate if we are digitally literate, how we can participate in civil discourse and civil society, and how important that is in this world we live in. Along those lines, of course, we have to address the question of what are the consequences of not being literate in these areas. I would like also to spend a little bit of time in making some remarks and to discuss with you and getting your feedback, of course, from the point of view of literacies in the Filipino environment. I think this is very, very important because although I am not from the Philippines, I feel quite attached to the Philippines, quite obviously, but also I have spent a number of times in the Philippines doing work over the years. So finally, what I would like to do after talking a little bit about the Filipino environment in the area of information literacies, I want to try to examine very briefly what the information professions can do in this space. Okay, so let's get started on this concept of information literacy. My very good friend and colleague, Heidi Julian, who is an expert in the area of information literacy based on years of research and many, many journal articles. She has described information literacy as very, very complex, and it is dynamic. So that over the last 40 to 50 years, there has been a great deal of discussion about what is information literacy, but it is also constantly changing, as we shall see. What I have decided to do is to look at the ideas of information literacy based on the framework of the Association of Research in College Libraries. They articulated a framework in 2016, and I have used this to pinpoint or to pull out a number of keywords that describes the ideas around information literacy. And as you can see on this slide, I have highlighted quite a number of them. So let's look at the very first one that I've highlighted, which is reflective discovery. Yes, we all know that information literacy at one level is about finding information and then reflecting on it to decide how we can use this information for decision making. Another area of that I have highlighted here is authority, this idea of who has written this particular piece of information. And I would like to really zero in on this particular area, because in the digital world, it is often quite difficult to know who indeed is the authority. And of course, the authority might change under different circumstances. That's part of the dynamics of information literacy. And of course, we are all very aware of the fact that we need to treat information ethically, and we have to participate in communities of learning to understand how ethical this has to be. Okay, so let us continue on this area of the area that I have highlighted, which is the understanding of how information is produced and valued. In the world of information professions, we all know that we go off to an academic library, then we can find journal articles, and those journal articles, we know how they've been produced. They have been written and they have been peer-reviewed by a number of different experts in the field, so that we have some idea of the authority in that information, and we tend to trust it. We might disagree with it, but we tend to trust it. In the digital world, this is very, very difficult, and it is in this area that I am particularly talking about. Who has produced the information? How can we value it or evaluate it as to its authority? And we need to understand how that information is produced in order to discuss the challenges we have of finding information, of being literate within a digital world. So in the previous slide, I was concerned very much with the broad concept of information literacy, pulling out the various keywords that are attached to the concept of information literacy. And rather than giving a definition, we discussed, at least I discussed, some of those keywords. While I always hesitate to give definitions, I find that in this presentation I am going to have to give some so that we are all on the same page. And in this particular case, I am giving the UNESCO definition, which, as I've specified here, it is a composite set of knowledge, skills, attitudes, etc., etc. You can actually read that right there. But what I like about the UNESCO definition is that it is not just information literacy. It adds the component that stresses that it has to deal with all media, as we shall see. In particular, this particular definition, which in UNESCO terms is information and media literacy. It is the merger of information literacy and media literacy. And in this particular case, it allows us to think about not just people effectively participating in the truth-seeking process. Notice that idea of truth-seeking, which is authority, but it also focuses on the empowerment of citizens. So it is not just information professions, it is the fact that all citizens should have the skills and the competencies to be able to make decisions within civil society. And of course, as we will come to, this area of civic literacy. It also stresses the idea that it allows individuals to be able to verify information, depending on what that information is, as well as the information professionals. And I should also add here that if we consider this UNESCO definition in its entirety, it presents the ideas that I am focusing on in this particular presentation. I should also, at this point, also say that I have added on the last slide a bibliography of the various links that I have used in this particular webinar. So having said that, I am going to read the entirety of this definition because I think it is important. I've already said about the knowledge and skills, but in particular, it allows effectively access, analyze, critically evaluate, interpret, use, create, and disseminate information and media products with the use of existing means and tools on a creative, legal, and ethical basis. That is very, very broad. However, I think it is important, particularly the area of using media and creating our own information and disseminating it. And those media products can be very, very broad indeed. So now, having introduced the UNESCO definition of information literacy to a much broader area, that is information and media literacy, we need to have a look at the components of media literacy. The dictionary definition of media is the means of mass communication, how we communicate to the masses. The masses being all citizens, all peoples, all individuals, all groups. And we do this through a variety of mechanisms. Print, broadcasting services, journalism, of course, is a particular type of service. And in this world, which is now a digital world, there, of course, is the internet and social media networks. And for the most of the rest of this presentation, I will be discussing these types of services or types of media, the internet and social media networks, because they are so prolific in our world. But I also want to point out that in all of these types of media, there is different formats. Of course, there is text, fairly straightforward. There is sound. There can be images, such as photographs or videos, just like this particular webinar, which I suspect is a moving image in a way. And there is data. All of these types of formats can come in a variety of ways or implications. Some of them may be biased. Some of them are contextual, depending on the context within that area that is being discussed. And in every case, they can be changed. They can be manipulated. I'm not necessarily saying malevolently. However, in the digital world, they can be manipulated ever so easily. And it is this type of manipulation, for a variety of reasons, to include biases or to include contexts, which I am really going to focus on, because it is this area of media literacy that we really have to understand. And that will bring me straight from here, from this slide, into the area of digital literacy. And so we finally come to digital literacy. Digital literacy is the ability to access, to manage, to understand, to integrate and communicate, to evaluate and to create information safely and appropriately through digital technologies. This really is the whole ball of wax. This is what we are aspiring to in this world. Of course, it is often called in other areas different things, such as competencies of computer literacy, competencies in information and communication technologies, as well as the other things that we've already spoken about of information and media literacy. UNESCO suggests that such digital literacy is an imperative for employment, for decent jobs, and for entrepreneurship. This is what all countries in their education aspires to for their citizens from an early age all the way through their oldest ages, to be digitally literate so that they can make reasonable decisions, that they are able to understand the information that they are reading, that they can evaluate that information, whether it is an image that has been digitally manipulated, to understand that some information that they have been reading, for example, on Facebook, may be fake news. This is what we are talking about, digital literacy. And so we are now going to move into the world of digital literacy. And I thought I would start out by looking at how the Philippine government, the Department of Education, is looking at digital literacy for its citizens. So here we have the Philippine Digital Literacy Framework. It was developed in 2011, and this is the model that it has published. It is called the Model for the 21st Century Digital Citizen. As you can see here, digital literacy is made up of an integrated set of components. For example, over here we have the knowledge of digital concepts and their operations. We have the using of ICTs, that is information and communication technologies, in all of different devices and applications, and that these can be used in everyday life. Obviously, we have here the use of the internet and digital systems networks, which of course would include social media networks. And there is an emphasis here of practicing of digital ethics in all walks of life. A fairly straightforward framework. I don't think we could argue with any of those items in there, although perhaps in the ensuing 10 years from when this particular framework was developed, there have been additional things that need to be put in there, and I would like to suggest that they generally have to do with the huge and enormous influence of the big technical companies, in particular the world of the internet and the social media, which I'm going to come to in a moment. Now, there was within UNESCO a number of reports were done to see how these digital frameworks were being developed around in the global economy around the world. And one particular report was written by Nancy Law and 3 or 4 of her colleagues. And this particular report, which is quite lengthy, and I've given you a copy of the URL, but this particular report came up with a number of difficulties that they found in the digital frameworks. This report looked at 5 particular countries, which included Australia and the Philippines. And there were 3 major difficulties. The first one was a lack of general awareness of use cases, how this digital framework was used within the country, and that included the Philippines had difficulties with this. Its contextualization and generalizations that we can make because of the use or lack of awareness of these use cases. And I hasten to note that Australia was also having difficulties with that. In the Philippines, law discovered that there was a need for training and development organizations for this. That Philippines, of course, was not the only one. I would hasten to say that Australia also has problems within training and development in this digital framework. There was a curious one that I am not entirely sure what it actually means. It says that in the Philippines there are negative attitudes towards the digital literacy framework. And I will look forward to hearing from you, perhaps, what this might mean. I would hazard a guess that it might have something to do with different norms or social norms and attitudes, which I will discuss towards the end. But perhaps you can come back to me in the Q&A to deal with this. So those are the Philippine digital framework. I think it is a very sensible one. It just needs perhaps a little bit more nuancing. And now the final concept that I wanted to embed in this webinar was the concept of civic literacy. Civic literacy is the knowledge and skills to participate effectively in civic life through knowing how to stay informed, understanding government processes, and knowing how to exercise the rights and obligations of citizenship at all levels, local, state, national, and global. It is very, very important to tie this in with digital literacy. There cannot be civic literacy in this day and age without very high levels of digital literacy. One of the great thinkers in the last few years is Yuval Harari, and I am a great admirer of Yuval Harari. Some of you may have read his book, Sapiens. But Yuval Harari notes that without digital literacy, there is a loss of agency. That is, if you are not digitally literate, you cannot make your own decisions. You have to rely on possibly other people's decisions. And he goes on to say that democracy, without digital literacy, democracy becomes an emotional puppet show. What a frightening thought, that we are really being manipulated emotionally to make decisions. And it is this particular area that I really want to talk about as some of the problems we have with big tech and what big tech is doing to manipulate us, because I think it is fair to say that in many cases now we are losing agency when we look at Google, and for example, for finding our information, for using Facebook, that perhaps many of the informations that are actually being dished up to us are being manipulated. And I think that these are the great, great challenges of digital literacy and in the area of civic democracy. So on that rather horrifying note, let's take a look at some of these challenges and wonder and think about how we might be aware of these and how we might actually be able to circumvent or at least fight back. And in order to do this, I'm going to introduce you to a couple of people who know a great deal about this and whom I think are very worthwhile following in the digital world. I would now like to come to the crux of this webinar. The fact that digital literacy must include an understanding that there is an asymmetric power of technology, the big tech companies, particularly the digital platforms of search and social media, and how they deliver content to us. If we don't understand that, we have no possibility of being able to make our decisions around what information we are going to take, what information we are going to use, and indeed how we can then follow up with sensible decisions in this world that we live in. This asymmetric power of technology is built around a framework of consequences, and I have listed quite a number of these consequences. It is the first one, the understanding of a filter bubble, which I think is extremely important. We're going to spend a lot of time on this, and along the way we might have time to discover that there are other consequences such as data harvesting, which can then have implications for our privacy. There is the understanding that we are being surveyed all of the time, or can be, and that there are new technologies of artificial intelligence and biotechnology. These last three I really do not have time to talk about. However, perhaps this can come up in, we can have some discussion about this in the Q&A. But let me get back to this idea of the filter bubble and predictive search. The digital platforms of search engines and social media, they deliver content to us based on algorithms, and these of making money by selling advertising. I will share with you the amounts of money that is actually made, but first of all, I would like you to meet a couple of my friends, digital friends, if you will, who have discussed this in the area of what we call the filter bubble and predictive search. So let me now move across and introduce you to these two people, Eli Parisa and Tristan Harris. So let me introduce to you the first of my two digital friends. This is Eli Parisa, who warned us back in 2011 about the problems of algorithmic search. He did this in a TED talk that was referring to the filter bubble. And I think you will find this very, very interesting because it is still very apt today, possibly even more so. So over to you, Tristan.
Visible algorithmic editing of the web. Google's doing it too. If I search for something and you search for something, even right now at the very same time, we may get very different search results. Even if you're logged out, one engineer told me, there are 57 signals that Google looks at. Everything from what kind of computer you're on, to what kind of browser you're using, to where you're located, that it uses to personally tailor your query results. Think about it for a second. There is no standard Google anymore. And you know, the funny thing about this is that it's hard to see. You can't see how different your search results are from anyone else's. But a couple of weeks ago, I asked a bunch of friends to Google Egypt and to send me screenshots of what they got. So here's my friend Scott's screenshot. And here's my friend Daniel's screenshot. When you put them side by side, you don't even have to read the links to see how different these two pages are. But when you do read the links, it's really quite remarkable. Daniel didn't get anything about the protests in Egypt at all in his first page of Google results. Scott's results were full of them. And this was the big story of the day at that time. That's how different these results are becoming. So it's not just Google and Facebook either. You know, this is something that's sweeping the web. There are a whole host of companies that are doing this kind of personalization. Yahoo News, the biggest news site on the internet, is now personalized. Different people get different things. Huffington Post, Washington Post, New York Times, all flirting with personalization in various ways. And where this moves us very quickly toward a world in which the internet is showing us what it thinks we want to see, but not necessarily what we need to see. As Eric Schmidt said, it'll be very hard for people to watch or consume something that has not, in some sense, been tailored for them. So I do think this is a problem. And I think if you take all of these filters together, if you take all of these algorithms, you get what I call a filter bubble. And your filter bubble is kind of your own personal, unique universe of information that you live in online. And what's in your filter bubble depends on who you are, and it depends on what you do. But the thing is that you don't decide what gets in. And more importantly, you don't actually see what gets edited out. Invisible.
Well, thank you for that, Eli, for that rather dire prediction almost 10 years ago now. And all I can say is that nothing has changed. In fact, in 2021, it is possibly even more of a problem, mainly because the technical companies have become bigger and more powerful. And so I would like to introduce to you another one of my digital friends, Tristan Harris. Tristan, in a TED Talk just 3 years ago, asked a series of questions about whose responsibility is it to try to rein in the power of these technical companies, or should they not have to be reined in at all? That is a question that you and I possibly have to ask. However, Tristan does suggest there are some possibilities. He asks whether it is government's responsibility. Should governments say what the technical companies should do? Should they ask for new legislation, for example, or new regulations? That is one possibility. Or, Tristan says, is it up to us, the digital citizens, the people who use these technological communication systems? Is it up to us to be able to discern what is possibly what we need to see? That does beg the question of digital literacy, of course. And finally, he asks the question, is it indeed up to the technical companies themselves? Should they be required to have some sort of ethics about what they deliver to their users? In fact, should the technical companies have more ethics about what they serve out to the users? So, having sort of brought some ideas along this lines, I thought perhaps I would get you to actually listen to Tristan. So over to you, Tristan.
I want you to imagine walking into a room, control room, with a bunch of people, 100 people hunched over at desks with little dials, and that control room will shape the thoughts and feelings of 1 billion people. This might sound like science fiction, but this actually exists right now, today. I know because I used to be in one of those control rooms. I was a design ethicist at Google, where I studied how do you ethically steer people's thoughts. Because what we don't talk about is a handful of people working at a handful of technology companies, through their choices, will steer what 1 billion people are thinking today. Because when you pull out your phone and they design how this works, or what's on the feed, it's scheduling little blocks of time in our minds. If you see a notification, it schedules you to have thoughts that maybe you didn't intend to have. If you swipe over that notification, it schedules you into spending a little bit of time getting sucked into something that maybe you didn't intend to get sucked into. When we talk about technology, We tend to talk about it as this blue sky opportunity. It could go any direction. And I want to get serious for a moment and tell you why it's going in a very specific direction. Because it's not evolving randomly. There's a hidden goal driving the direction of all of the technology we make. And that goal is the race for our attention. Because every news site, TED, elections, politicians, games, even meditation apps have to compete for one thing, which is our attention. And there's only so much of it. And the best way to get people's attention is to know how someone's mind works. And there's a whole bunch of persuasive.
Okay, so how one's mind works. That is a real problem because predictive search is based on how people's minds work. And in 2020, Tristan continues to make some really important arguments. He says that we are moving from a lawful society, this is the normal society that we live in, to an unlawful virtual internet society. That the technical companies are not being controlled. And he imagines, well, more than imagines, he states categorically that this has to change, that there have to be some sort of rules and regulations. What these are, I will leave to you, and perhaps we can have some discussion in the Q&A. In the meantime, I want to come back now to what is happening in the Philippines. So now, let's have a quick look at the use of digital media in the Philippines. And I have to say that while these particular statistics are about the Philippines, it is no different in my country, in most other countries around the world. In the Philippines, Google is the most used search engine. It has a market share of 97%, almost entirely. People in the Philippines search on the internet for information using Google. The other digital platform, the social networks, Facebook is the most popular. In fact, in the Philippines, almost 78 million people use Facebook for a variety of reasons. But what is really more important, I think, from the point of view of digital literacy is that Facebook is indeed the daily source of news for almost 72% of the population. That is much higher than newspapers and the radio. So if we really consider the authority of the news that we are reading based on Parisa and Harris's understandings, we should be very concerned about how we are being manipulated into getting information that may not be authorized or may not be fully authoritative. Sometime at the beginning of this webinar, I talked about fake news. And indeed, a lot of the fake news is coming from the social media, such as Facebook itself. How are we going to decide what to do about this? Perhaps we need to be really concerned about these ethical questions. How do we make informed decisions within a civil society if we don't heed the warnings of Parisa and Harris? We really do need to begin to consider the warnings about the power of the technical giants. I will now like to move over to how we might think about dealing with this problem? What are some of the things that we need to do in order to circumvent the problems of big tech? So what can we do about all of this? Just a few pointers that I would like to make. The first one of which is know yourself. Know how you search, know what you're looking for, understand, be self-aware. And once you really are self-aware, then possibly you can do some more intelligent ways of finding information. I would suggest that you search judiciously. Consider the private search mode, for example, Google's incognito window, where your data is not being used and where you are therefore not at the mercy of predictive algorithmic searching. The same is using organic search, where you use sophisticated syntax, such as searching in the title, searching in what is called the verbatim search. The verbatim search gives you what you have specifically asked for, not the predictive search. And always start clearing your history, your search history, constantly, because that way the data that is being collected about you is not being used. So that is when you are searching for information. You can certainly in the social media use the privacy settings so that you are opting out of the privacy issues, not just taking whatever Facebook wishes to give you. You need to be constantly making critical evaluations of any new online tool that comes up. These are constantly being used. Don't use them until you know exactly what they are doing. Be critical about these sorts of things. Make critical judgments. I would strongly suggest that you update your knowledge of the digital landscape all the time. This means that you need to be working within your communities, your scholarship communities, and sharing the things that you have discovered about the digital landscape, not only globally, but also within your own particular areas and in the Philippines itself. I would highly recommend that you follow all of the ethical discussions that are available around the world about the digital reforms that need to be done. Which reminds me, do you know what digital reforms might be available in the Philippines? Are there submissions being provided? Do you know these things? You do need to be up on what the governments might be doing. And at all times, think critically about the digital environment itself. Sometimes getting the information digitally is not the best way of doing it. You do need to be very sensible about all of these things. So having said that, I think indeed we do need to come back to first premises. Those first premises might be about your own communities of practice. Who is doing this sort of work in your community? Be part of that digital scholarship so that you can be very, very sensible about information literacy, digital literacy, and of course, civic literacy. And finally, I suggested at the beginning of this webinar that there were a lot of implications for information professionals. Now I am addressing what you need to be doing. As individuals, I've already suggested that you need to be highly digitally literate. You need to be constantly updating your knowledge of the digital environment. But more importantly, you can't do it all by yourself. What you need to be doing is forging what I would call key trusted partnerships. The obvious one, of course, would be public libraries, but consider also how you might work with a lot of other organizations that will help you to get the words across. What are the local newspapers doing? Are you partnering with community groups and non-government organizations, all of which have a stake in digital literacies? What about local businesses and industries, particularly in fields of studies? For example, in the legal or the legal professions or the health professions. All of these people have enormous stakes in digital literacy, and rather than trying to do it all yourself, collaborate with them. Set up these groups to meet and to discuss what needs to be done. These are the sorts of things that you need to do yourself, and to work within those groups, those community groups, to share your knowledge and indeed try to solve some of the problems of digital literacy. So we now have reached the end of this presentation. And I'm very well aware of the fact that I have not addressed an important literacy, that is cultural literacy. Cultural literacy is how we make sense of information within context. And that context always involves social norms and social values. Now, within the Philippines, I am not very cognizant of your social norms and values. And so I would like to end this presentation by posing a question to you, a question which will answer some of the possibilities of cultural literacy. And for this, I would refer you to your own Kathleen Obia's 2018 study of students in your university, yes, the University of the Philippines, and how they used social network sites for finding information. And within this study, one of the social norms or social values that was being quoted was gaya, which, as I understand, means imitation, that it is normal to imitate other people in the area of information seeking behaviors. Then possibly within social networks, you see what somebody has said is important, and so you imitate that by saying, I like that. And the more people say, I like that, then the more it is being reiterated across the networks. Now, if this indeed is my correct interpretation, then I leave it with you to have a discussion within the Q&A on the importance of cultural literacy. And with that final statement, I would like to say I have thoroughly enjoyed presenting this seminar, and I will now say thank you very much. A couple of minutes late.
Thank you so much, Maureen. There are a lot of very interesting points and questions that you have raised, and I'm sure our viewers are excited to engage with those ideas. But before that, let us hear first a reaction from one of our faculty members. Our reactor is an associate professor of UP SLIS and the editor of the Philippine Journal of Librarianship and Information Studies, or the PHJLIS. Our dear viewers, let us listen to Dr. Ira Benrosro Cabab.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, PJ, for that kind introduction. And hello, Maureen. Thanks for that wonderful talk. And thank you for tuning in to our Gabriel Bernardo lecture for this year. And even though we're not meeting physically, I think this has been mentioned by our dean that we're so happy to have you in this program. Okay, so this afternoon we have a very engaging talk and very timely. It's about how we can increase the literacy of individuals and community. So while listening and at the same time taking into consideration the current context of literacy and digital media and ethical and responsible creation and use of information, this question keeps popping into my head. It's the same question as what Dean Mary Grace raised earlier in her opening remarks. Gaya-gaya ako. So this question is, what would Professor Gabriel Bernardo say or do in this context, in this current context of digital media and even social media? Obviously, none of us here had met Professor Gabriel A. Bernardo, or GAB. But we're benefiting from his hard work and his dedication to the profession. Obviously, Professor Gabriel Bernardo did not only build the foundations of the University of the Philippines Library. He was also an educator and a bibliographer. He focused his life on the tracing and finding and preserving books and information resources, especially Filipiniana. Because during that time, Filipiniana materials were really scarce. There was a small amount of Filipiniana resource during that time, so it was really his focus to find them and try to list them down. So fast forward to the present, and in these days, we must say that the scarcity of information is not a problem anymore. With the vast amount of data and mechanisms and digital devices that we can use to create, disseminate, transfer information, and even to preserve them, I'm sure everyone is getting overwhelmed. And perhaps Professor Gabriel Bernardo will be overwhelmed as well. So do the increase of information and the advancements of technology really solve the problems regarding the use, creation, access, dissemination, and preservation of information, and even the ethical use and dissemination of it, as well as establishing the authority of information? As what Dr. Henninger discussed, information and media literacy is so important, and as 21st century digital citizens, we should continuously learn how to properly use and apply ICT in our daily lives. And what struck me more, especially in the discussion of digital literacy framework for the Philippines, are the concepts of digital ethics, civic literacy, and cultural literacy. Because these concepts, these things, we must have this, and at the same time, we must exercise them. And then complicating these concepts, digital ethics, civic literacy, and cultural literacy, would be helpful and would have direct impact on what appropriate digital literacy framework that we can adapt here in the Philippines. So let's start with digital ethics. It's about how technology will shape our political, social, and moral being. So this is something that I think everyone will agree with me should be properly exercised, especially with the issue of filter bubble a decade ago, and now the issue of singularity, wherein a computer would be super intelligent than humans. And then some would say that it's the end of the human era. Computers, the technologies are now controlling us. Should we be worried But some think that, no, it's fine. Humans will just become more intelligent because the machines are becoming intelligent as well. These are different thoughts regarding this issue of singularity. And as we delve into this issue, again, as Dr. Henninger discussed earlier, we must exercise this, we must know digital ethics. So the second concept is civic literacy, and I think this is very important, especially in democratic societies. People have to be informed, more discerning, engaged, and they know how to exercise their rights and responsibilities. And through this, we can make democracy work and at the same time protect it. There is nothing wrong with being creative and super active in social networking sites. You do TikTok, you post your selfies in social media. There's nothing wrong with that. But again, we should know our limits. And at the same time, we should exercise ethics and know how to do or how to have civic literacy. And libraries can start with media and information literacy. We've been hearing this for like so long. We should know how to inform our citizens and start engaging them in the issues of their communities. We can also be trusted partners, and we should regain our authority, at the same time reunite communities through culturally sensitive programs and policies, which leads to the next concept of cultural literacy. So when we say cultural literacy, most of the keywords that we usually hear are inclusivity, acceptance, representations. And as we all know, becoming literate, regardless of what kind of literacy you have, is actually grounded in people's cultural beliefs and social surroundings and how they participate in an ecosystem of people, structures, rules, and most importantly, trust. So I think when we are discussing cultural literacy, it would be interesting and, of course, important to look back to our indigenous concepts of Filipino social reality. Dr. Henninger mentioned about gaya-gaya, and I just did that earlier when I ginaya ko si Professor Barcelona dun sa kanyang opening remarks. But I think it would be helpful for us to go back to our indigenous concepts and indigenous social psychology. So for example, the hiya, utang na loob, pakisama, kapwa, pakiramdam. It's like we're addressing present and future information problems and issues by going back to our roots. It's like, which is actually one of the areas of scholarship of Professor Gabriel Bernardo, which is culture and folklore, and how to communicate with the people through the different information sources. So we have to learn from that. We have to learn from our previous experiences, and we have to learn from our roots. Let's go back to our roots. So once again, thank you, Dr. Henninger, for that insightful discussion and very timely, especially these days, that we are having problems as regards authority and trust to agencies. And it's like a form of reminder of how we can continue Professor Gabriel Bernardo's legacy as LIS professionals as we let the future generations benefit from his hard work and our hard work as professionals. So once again, marami pong salamat and thank you.
Thank you, Professor Benroso Cabab, for initiating such an interesting discussion. Actually, there are already a lot of questions coming in from our viewers. And to our watchers, if you have any questions for our speaker, you can go to menti.com and key in the code 40136600. You could also use the QR code shown on screen to go to our questions page. Please check the previously posted questions and of both questions you would like to be prioritized. Okay, while we're waiting for more questions, I would like to announce a few things. The latest issue of the the latest issue of the Philippine Journal of Librarianship and Information Studies with the editorial entitled New Agenda for the New Normal is now available. You may download a free copy of the PHJLIS by going to phjlis.org. You may also submit your articles by logging into the same website, or if you have any inquiries, you may send your email to editor@phjlis.org. Application is now open for the Master of Library and Information Science program of the UP SLIS. This is a taught postgraduate program that prepares students for careers in academic, special, public, and research libraries and in related occupations such as managing archival collections, teaching, and consultancy. You can download the application package from bit.ly/MLIS 2021. Again, that's bit.ly/MLIS 2021. Further information will be announced shortly. We're also inviting our viewers, especially the students, teachers, and practitioners of library and information science to check out the information innovation at UTS. Information Innovation at UTS is a seminar series on a variety of topics related to information management. Previous seminars have included expert panelists and speakers on design thinking, consumer privacy and data rights, open data, and information governance. This seminar series is organized by Matthew Moore and Hillary Yerbury. You can check it out by going to their YouTube page, Information Innovation at UTS. For future events, you can also look them up at meetup.com. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel and like our Facebook page, UPSLIS, where this video is currently being streamed. That's UPSLIS on YouTube and Facebook. We would also like to give a shout out to Michael Olson, who is watching us right now. We would also like to greet the students from Bulacan State University. Hello, thank you for joining us today. And of course, our students from the UP School of Library and Information Studies. Thank you very much for tuning in. Okay. At this point, I believe we have a few questions. We have some questions from our viewers. But I also would like to raise this because we always ask, what would Gabriel A. Bernardo, what would his reaction be if he's with us right now? And I remember an account from former Dean Rosa Vallejo that Gabriel Bernardo is very famous for his phrase "festina lente," which is a term that means make haste slowly. And I think that is something that sometimes we can apply given this deluge of information. We sometimes want to take it slow, right? But I just remember that when we were just curious what he will be thinking about right now. But we have a few questions here, and Maureen, I believe this one you can definitely answer this one because this one concerns Australia. Are you ready?
I am ready, yes.
Okay, so there's a question submitted here. Backing up on responsibility and digital ethics, what's your take on Facebook's deal with the Australian government in relation to public interest and freedom of information across the digital space? If I remember correctly, there were an instance where all the news websites were blocked from Facebook. So can you tell us more about it?
Well, yes, I can tell you that it was a decision or a combination of decisions that's being watched around the world as a test case. Here in Australia over the last couple of years, there's been a lot of concern about the fact that Facebook, not only Facebook, but in particular Facebook was one that the government was gunning for, was using journalistic content, just putting it up but not paying for it, so that journalists and journalism is very their business model has been really problematic because they don't have enough money. But the Facebooks of the world were using it and not paying for it, just putting it up. And the Australian government decided that they were going to go after them. They brought in some possible regulations saying that you will have to pay for this data, these stories. Google did exactly the same thing. I'll quickly say that Google came to the party fairly quickly. There are a number of reasons why they might do that, particularly that they can certainly afford to pay for it. That was one thing. But more importantly, I think they were a little bit worried about a couple of other search engines, such as Microsoft's search engine. Mm-hmm. Facebook decided that they were going to come to this party at all. We're going to take them at their we're just going to say to hell with them. And Facebook doesn't have a board of directors. It is an autocracy of Mark Zuckerberg. And overnight, without any warning, they removed all news from Australia. But their algorithms, and these are algorithms, can do all kinds of things. And they didn't even use an algorithm to not take stuff from government websites. All of the information about COVID, for example, all of that was removed. And this was one of the problems. This is an organization that has extraordinary algorithms, and they couldn't even do that. Well, all hell broke loose, as you can imagine, and I can assure you that the UK, the US, France, and Germany were watching this very, very carefully because they have similar legislation that they want to bring in. There were some discussions, obviously, with Mark Zuckerberg, and within 48 hours, he said, oh, okay, look, I think that, I'm sorry about the COVID information, et cetera, but yeah, what we'll do, we will begin to pay for it. So it was like a little country standing up to Facebook. So that is what has happened. We'll have to wait and see how this does play out in the future. But it was an interesting case study about trying to fight back against what the Australian government thought was unfair. All right, has that answered the question?
Yes, I believe so. And that is a perfect example of showing how we can really stand up to this big giant techs. And something that you mentioned at the end of your presentation, such as building partnerships. If libraries can partner with government institutions and other institutions, we can definitely take control of our information. Thank you, Maureen. We actually have some questions that were submitted by our participants ahead of this presentation, and one of the questions that were pre-submitted is they want to know how can we teach digital literacy in the elementary or grade school level. Do you have some suggestions? How is Australia doing it?
Australia is possibly having the same sorts of difficulties that every other country is doing. They are trying to tell students the sorts of things that I have been telling them, but it's not cutting through because it is so ubiquitous to use. Just go to Google, get the information, and use it. All right. Now, I would suggest if I were to be in a consultant's role here of asking how one would do this, I would actually start out with Eli Parise's idea. Have the students in class spend half an hour, an hour finding information using Google, and have them all doing it and seeing what they come up with, no really discussions. And then after about an hour, assign a particular request for information for the entire class, and watch and see the different types of information each student gets. And I've done this myself. I've done it in classes. I've done it with undergraduates and postgraduates, and they all get very different results. I think that is what possibly one of the most salient first steps would be, to show that you're getting one person's getting one piece of information, another one is getting another one. Why? Well, it's because I've done a whole lot of liking of this, or because I've done this, or I keep searching, whatever it might be. I think to get across to the fact that their information, it might be very, very good information, but it is not necessarily the information that they should be getting, that they are being slightly manipulated. So that would be the very first lesson that I would teach. And then from there, then going through to, as the students get a bit older, possibly not grade school, maybe 6th grade or 7th grade, then be shown how to use some of those other techniques for verbatim search. I certainly have, over the years, probably taught school librarians, maybe in a couple of hundred of them, maybe several hundred of them, how to do precisely this. And I think it is still possibly the best way of starting, I think.
All right. Thank you for that, Maureen. That's very specific and practical. And I think that is something that can be easily implemented at that level, at the grade school level. Okay.
And with your own students as well.
Yeah, that is right. I remember there was a time when there is a scholar who mentioned, imagine if Google search is also the same with Wikipedia. If our Wikipedia articles will be dependent on your context. Imagine if that's the case. There was a time when we are mocking Wikipedia, but it turned out that Wikipedia is actually doing it right. While Facebook and then Google search results, they're kind of manipulative in a way.
If I could make a brief comment there.
Yeah, sure.
Certainly, we would notice that Google it has an understanding with Wikipedia, and of course, Wikipedia results come up right at the top of your searches. The difference here is that real people are correcting things in Wikipedia, and they are passionate about doing this. In Google, they're not real people. They are computer programs, they are algorithms. And I think we have to always remember that at times real people bring the nuances rather than the big techs who want to make money. And I think I did say in the lecture that I was going to tell you how much they make. Google last year, $182 billion, that's B for billion, dollars in advertising revenue. Why should they try to do anything that is more ethical? But they're going to have to. Thank you.
All right. Thank you for that, Maureen. We still have a few questions here. Another question that was brought up. Now, this has, I believe this also talks, this concerns more about the cultural literacy here in the Philippines and the context here in the Philippines. What could we do when politicians and lawmakers do not listen to scientific evidence and reliable information sources when creating their policies and making decisions, such as now during this pandemic? Can we teach them digital literacy?
I think teaching them digital literacy is possibly slightly difficult under the circumstances. I think this is where information professionals of all kinds, at all levels, should be then working with the government institutions themselves. And because political agendas are, as we see, they're political agendas, for a whole variety of reasons. But I think as citizens, we should be writing to our local parliamentary members. That would be one thing. I mean, this is just straight out civil democracy, right? I think, but in particular, working with, getting a group together to work with government agencies, to say, this is not right. This is some of the things that we need to do. Right submissions, being good citizens, I think, is the best way of doing this. And it's going to be a very, very hard row, I think. We just have to look at what happened in the United States over people not listening to the science when, something like 80 million people don't believe in science, but that's over viruses. But if we look at the number of people who don't believe in climate change, so any of these political agendas, we need to be insistent on joining groups. Now, I'm not talking about being an activist and marching on the streets, but within our information professionals, setting up collaborative spaces, giving workshops to people within government institutions and non-government institutions on how to actually do this, to see why something is fake news, that is not right, the conspiracy theories. I think that if we are digitally literate, we can set up hopefully key partnerships, which is what I alluded to before, in order to try to move this forward and get the good word out, not the false word. Okay, not a very good answer to your highly complex question there from one of your viewers, but I do think that's where civic literacy is absolutely vital. Okay.
I agree with that, and that is actually a very difficult, complex problem. And civic duty and literacy is just one of the solutions out there that we can offer in the LIS profession. Now, speaking of building key partnerships, there's a question here. What can you say to Filipinos who are disheartened and frustrated due to the fact that hegemonic forces making sure that information and technology are asymmetrically distributed to retain the status quo?
This is at one level, I'm going to move away from the Philippines because this is to some extent a political question, but it is the same in Australia, anywhere else, all right? Again, I don't have the real answer to that. I think it's something that is evolving. We have to actually, I think as a first step, make our citizens, all citizens, individuals, whether they're 10 years of age or 90 years of age, get them to understand that we are being manipulated by big tech. If we can get them to understand that, then maybe we can move to the next step of saying, all right, now in our particular context, why is this wrong? Okay, so it's a huge problem. I don't know the answer, but I do think that making sure that individuals actually understand that there may be a problem. I think if they understand that there is a problem, then maybe we can begin to work with how to solve the problem. But I would suggest, certainly in Australia, most people have no idea that it's a problem. Oh yeah, they love when they do a search and they get exactly the information that they believe anyway, right? So that's not a problem. So I think the first step is to make people aware of the fact that there is a problem and then go from there.
I think that's a perfect response. Recognizing that we have a problem is a very good start, Maureen. Now, I actually want to raise this question because the other day there was an article that came out from Connor Sullivan, also part of the LAS profession in the United States, and his article is about the title is "Why Libraries Can't Fight Fake News," and one of his arguments is that one of our core principles, actually, it's kind of a rhetoric. one of our core principles, as mentioned by IFLA, is neutrality, and we're against censorship. And we can see in Twitter, in Facebook, that there are some personalities spewing these fake news. And what will be our position there? Because if we're going to emulate neutrality and anti-censorship, what would be the position of the librarian profession for that?
All right. First off, I absolutely subscribe to the idea of neutrality and no censorship. And then I have to say, but, because so much information has been censored for us, particularly in the social media. And should we censor, as librarians, stuff that is actually false? I think that is a quandary, again, a problem for librarians. It would be the same as if a book was a very well, and we'll stick with print because it's not quite so nebulous. If a book comes in on X, well, let's talk about the Holocaust, for example. The Holocaust happened, and there are people who say the Holocaust did not happen. Should we have both books in the library in order to be neutral? I would toss it back to you. Should we have both in there to be balanced? I don't know.
I think that is where all the critical librarianship movement, which is happening all over the world right now, is their position on giving platform to these different voices and being critical about neutrality. And I think this is still an ongoing research and debate, and this would be an exciting one, especially to the students who are listening right now. So please answer the questions being raised by Maureen. That is a very good research question.
It certainly is. And to follow on very quickly, for example, in Twitter or in Facebook or Huawei or any of the other ones that we have, the first thing to do is to make sure that people know that there is a problem, that there is material being put up by different groups that is counter to another viewpoint. As long as people understand that there are two different viewpoints here, at least you can then sort that out and then decide which you are going to go for. So I actually think it is, again, understanding the problem. So many of us do not know that there is a problem in Google and in social media. If they are made aware that there can be some manipulation and the filtering, etc., then they can begin to make some headway in deciding what they're going to do about the problem. All right?
All right. Thank you for that, Maureen. Actually, there are some questions that are coming in right now, but due to the time, I believe we can accommodate 2 more questions, and later on, probably we can send an email or post an answer to some of these other questions. A question here, which I believe was also discussed during the lecture, is information literacy is important for those seeking new information, or that is the question. I think the question is about how can you use information literacy when seeking new information? Is information literacy important in seeking new information?
Yes, of course. That would be my immediate answer. but it is one particular aspect, and that is once you found new information, you then have to evaluate it. And that part is the evaluation of that information. And the first thing there is, as with anything, who wrote it? Consider the source. That's the first thing, which we always do when you read a book of some kind or you read a manuscript. Who wrote this? Go check the authorship. All right? Now, that becomes problematic in social media, of course, in that often who wrote it has been anonymized. Okay? We don't know who wrote it. But I think it is to answer your, the specific question was, what do you do next once you found something? It is going back to that reflective practice, reading it, thinking about it. If something sounds really right, go check a couple of other sources. All right? Go check on Wikipedia. I don't know. But I mean, go check a couple of other sources. This is what we normally do in the print world. In the newspaper world, for example, in Australia, we have two major newspapers in Sydney. One is more progressive, the other one is more conservative. So if something appears in the more progressive newspaper, we have an idea, an understanding of what might be the background, where it's coming from. In the more conservative one, we actually understand that as well. So then we can make a balanced judgment when they say something, then can we then substantiate it somewhere else? All right. In social media, this is very difficult. But yeah, I think, again, another piece of wonderful research for one of your students. Okay.
Yeah, yes, definitely. And I agree with you. For those who are watching us right now, especially to the students in the University of the Philippines, feel free to take LAS 50. We're offering information literacy, and those things that Maureen mentioned are will be discussed. And it's actually a course that will help you practice information and digital literacy. So it's open to everyone. Okay, I believe we can only accommodate just one last question. There's a particular question here, Maureen. I think this viewer would like to know more about the article that you referenced to, the article that was authored by Law et al. The audience wants to know what the author might have meant about unwillingness of citizens to step out of their social media echo chambers, which might be exacerbated by filter bubbles. What can you explain that more?
Well, now it's been a while since I actually read the law. Nancy Law's. We're referring to Nancy Law's
Yes.
UNESCO report. First off, there were a large number of points that they were trying to address across the 5 countries. And that particular one, just repeat it again so I make sure that I've got the right one that was being asked about in the Philippines of people wanting to step back and addressing. Could you just read the question again for me, please?
Oh, yeah, sure. The question is, they want to know why, what could have been meant by people unwilling to step out of their social media echo chambers. Like, why would they be unwilling to step out of their echo chambers?
Because, well, I'm putting it in my own words now, and it's not just people in the Philippines. We like to have our own beliefs being confirmed. It is simple as that. And that is why I raised the Gaia idea. We like to agree with people, but in particular, if we have a particular set of stands, then we like that to be not contradicted by many, many people. It is nice to psychologically be confirmed that we are right. Now, certainly, Tristan Harris talks a great deal about that confirmation, that psychological confirmation. And I think it is very uncomfortable to be proved that perhaps we are not necessarily totally right. That leads me to the possibility that if we believe a particular stand, okay, so we're in our own echo chamber, everybody, all our friends, we all think exactly the same way, that's comfortable, right? But if at some stage they begin to see that that is not right, a lot of people still stay in their echo chamber because they don't like to admit that they were wrong. Right? So I think it is being in a comfortable space rather than being challenged. It is very difficult to have your beliefs challenged. Okay? Most of us like to say, oh, yes, but, right? But it is, I think that is what that was meant in that particular report. But it's not just in the Philippines, it's everywhere. It's human nature to have what we believe to be confirmed. And I will go right back to Yuval Harari on that one. He will tell you exactly why that is the way it is.
Yeah,
is that a reasonable answer to your question?
yes, definitely I agree with you on that one. We also have some cultural values. We have pakikisama, which I believe roughly translates to like mateship in Australia, where
That's right.
you just want to get along with your mates, and you want to avoid confrontation. So that can also exacerbate your.
Yes, I think that is very much a lot of people don't like confrontation. Most Australians don't particularly like confrontation. That's where I sort of possibly are not quite Australian. but I do agree. Yeah, confrontation is difficult, right? So it's easier to be a little bit more complacent. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much, Maureen. There are so many very good points and questions that were raised during this lecture. And to be honest, there are some few more questions, and we can address that on our Facebook page and YouTube channel. Unfortunately, we're running out of time. At this point, we will now be awarding the Certificate of Appreciation to our speaker and reactor. All right. And at this point, I would also like to invite the Dean of the UP School of Library and Information Studies, Dean Mary Grace Golfo. Hello, Dean. Welcome back.
Hi, thank you, Paul. Wow. I'd like to say
Okay.
this
Sure.
Bernardo Memorial Lecture Series is selling like hotcakes now online. If my comparison is correct, but yeah, this is a very hot topic, very, very timely. And thank you very much, Maureen.
You're most welcome.
Thank you, Maureen.
And thank you, Mama.
I would like to thank you, Mom. I would like to read now the certificate. The certificate reads: the University of the Philippines School of Library and Information Studies, the University of the Philippines, Diliman, Quezon City, presents this certificate of appreciation to Maureen Henninger, PhD, for being the resource speaker, and to Ira S. Benroso Cabab, PhD, for being the reactor for the 41st Gabriel A. Bernardo Memorial Lecture Series with the theme Informed Societies, Responsible Citizenry, the Role of Libraries in a Democratic Society, given this 17th day of March 2021 at the School of Library and Information Studies, University of the Philippines, Diliman, Quezon City. signed by Professor Juana Feliz P. Santos, Chair of the 41st GAB Memorial Lecture Series, and Professor Mary Grace P. Golfo Barcelona, Dean of the UP SLIS. So here are your certificates, Maureen and Ira.
Well, thank you very, very much. I will just put it up there.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I will put it up on my bookshelf somewhere.
All right. Again, thank you so much, Dr. Henninger and Professor Benoso Cabab. We wish you success in all your endeavors. And Maureen, we are very excited to work with you in the following months. Thank you very much.
Yes.
Thank you.
I also am delighted.
Yep, you should make the formal announcement that Dr. Maureen Henninger will be our visiting professor at the SLIS starting this March and until August. So, yep. So we'll have her work with her. And we're very excited. And of course, Dr. Michael Olson.
Yes, Michael and I are busy talking about all of this. We're thrilled, really thrilled.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. At this point, I would like to call on Professor Juana Feliz P. Santos, the Chair of the 41st Gabriel A. Bernardo Memorial Lecture, for the closing remarks.
Good afternoon, everyone. First, I would like to thank all of our viewers for spending time with us this afternoon for the 41st Gabriel A. Bernardo Memorial Lecture Series. We really appreciate your continued support for all of our events. Second, on behalf of UP-SLIS, I would like to express my deepest gratitude to Dr. Maureen Henninger for sharing her knowledge and valuable insights with us in her lecture earlier. Thank you so much, ma'am. Next, I would also like to thank Dr. Ira Buenrostro-Cabab for her contributions to the discussion as our reactor this afternoon. Of course, a big thanks to our UP-SLIS faculty and staff, led by our beloved Dean, Professor Mary Grace P. Golfo Barcelona. Special mention to our tech team and host, Professor Nathan Isip, Professor Mark Santos, and Professor PJ Perez. Thank you for making this event possible. We have learned a lot from the discussions from both our speaker and reactor. The importance of information literacy and its implication to democracy is indeed a very relevant topic today. I hope that this lecture instilled in us the value of information literacy in that its benefits go beyond helping us do research. It has multiple applications and it greatly impacts our citizenship. I also hope that this lecture has inspired us to see that information literacy is a tool that helps us engage in society by allowing us to understand and make sense of what is happening around us. Finally, as this event is a celebration of the legacy of Gabriel A. Bernardo, let us take to heart our role as information professionals. We should not just understand the importance of the concepts discussed earlier. We also have to remember the crucial responsibility that we have in educating other people as regards information literacy. With that, I thank you all again. Join us in all our upcoming events. Thank you so much for your support and have a good day.
Thank you very much, Ma'am Waina. To all our viewers, thank you so much for joining us, and I hope you all had meaningful takeaways from this public lecture. To receive your certificates, please don't forget to register using the link to be shown on screen. If you missed portions of this webinar, you may rewatch it as a Facebook video or check our YouTube channel. For updates on our upcoming activities, please follow us at our official Facebook page, UP SLIS. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/UPSLIS, or visit our website, that's slis.upd.edu.ph. Once again, this is Paul Jason Perez, your host and moderator, wishing you all the best. See you on our next webinar. Paalam.